morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Lorenzo Murzilli. I am the founder of Murzilli Consulting and the co-founder of DroneTalks. And welcome everybody on the Woman Behind the Drone Revolution #3. We are live on LinkedIn as well. So if you're following us on LinkedIn, please, you can use that to make your comments. Otherwise, you can use the general chat lines. Today with me, we have three fantastic entrepreneurs, certainly successful women behind the drone revolution. And I would like quickly to introduce their names. And we have Barbara Pareja. She's the Executive Director for Connectivity for Aviation and IoT Technical Director at GSMA. We have with us also Bronwyn Morgan, CEO at Xio Air and Airversity. And Paola Santana, she's the co-founder at Matternet and now founder and CEO of Glass. So good morning or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are located. All right, so today we have a good hour to talk with you about several topics, so we don't want to delay further the conversation. I think we can start with your 5 minutes or 5 to 8 minutes introductions and about yourself, about what you are doing and what makes you so special to be here with us today. And we can go to the next slide and let's start. So next slide, please. Anita, you can go to the next. Thank you very much. And Bronwyn, you will be first, so the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here this morning. Anytime we get to talk about drones in this industry, I'm in. Well, I am Bronwyn. I am the CEO and founder of both Xio Air and Airversity. Xio Air is an outsourced AI-based drone services, data analytics, and autonomous solution, primarily focused on inspection and mapping for infrastructure-based sectors, telecom, utilities, oil and gas, energy, civil infrastructure, climate and environmental observation, and catastrophe and disaster. We're based out of Atlanta and St. Louis. And my other company is Airversity. Airversity is a professional drone pilot academy. We just opened up our first center of excellence in St. Louis, and our next location will be announced here shortly. But we're a destination for all things training and professionalization for corporate, commercial, and public safety pilots. And I'm also a Part 107 pilot myself, FAA Drone Pro, and FAA Safety Rep. That's a mouthful, but that's Bronwyn.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your introduction. And Barbara, what about yourself?
So first of all, thank you for having me here, and also for all the audience. Pleasure to be here with fantastic speakers and you, Lorenzo. So I'm a little bit of an outsider. So I'm, as you mentioned, I'm taking care and leading the activity in aviation GSMA. GSMA is it's not coming from the aviation. GSMA is non-profit associations which represent the mobile industry. So I'm coming from a different industry. And why am I here? Because already 5 years ago, we decided to have a look at the opportunity of how the mobile network could eventually be supporting commercial services, and particularly in beyond visual line of sight. I'm actually a great believer that we could do something about it for unleashing commercially services. And we also use it ourselves, as Bronwyn mentioned, inspections. So this is one of the things that we do ourselves in inspecting the network. So that's why I started looking at this area. So I started being fascinated. And I have a long history of telecommunications, but it's always been a close call to working in aviation since my university time. So I will touch upon later maybe why it's so interesting. So I hope to bring a little bit of from the outside also what we can inject new innovations and how we can stimulate the drone industry and the aviation. Thank you for having me here.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you. Paola, what about you?
First of all, thank you, Lorenzo, and to your whole team for inviting me today to be here with these powerhouse women that are moving forward the industry. I'm Paola Santana. I'm right now founder and CEO of Glass, doing technology, but for governments, something in a totally different industry than Matternet, my first company that I co-founded 10 years ago, together with Andreas Raptopoulos, my amazing co-founder. Matternet was and is the pioneering drone delivery company in the world. It sounds, visionary and ambitious, but that is what it is. It is what it is. We did many of the world's first with drone delivery, and I was the former CEO and chief regulatory officer, and I was in charge of setting up drone networks, to taking all these baby drones, how I call them, and taking them from the lab where they were, perfectly crafted and tested and whatnot, and then putting them in the real world, defining operations with new civil aviation authorities that had never operated drone delivery in their airspace, creating that regulation, enabling exemptions from time to time, creating the protocols with NASA, UTM and whatnot, and then finally getting to establish what we did in Switzerland for the first time. That was the first drone delivery operation over people and over property in 2017, working in Africa with UNICEF in the first known case of drone delivery to fight against HIV by transporting antiretrovirals, and then many of the early use cases of drone delivery connected to automation and to other industries, especially healthcare. So I was with the company for the first 7 years. I departed the company 4 years ago to found this one. But I'm still very close to the industry because I probably mentor 5 entrepreneurs per month on how to do their first operations, where to go, where to start, what's the big problem that hasn't been cracked. So I'm also super grateful for what the industry gave me in terms of expertise and to understand how to create anything new from scratch.
Thank you, Paula. And I would like to start the interactive part of this webinar. First of all, with a reminder again to all our viewers that they can ask questions themselves on the Q&A, and feel free to do that. And if you're following on LinkedIn as well, you can ask questions there. But I have a few questions that I will use the privilege of being the host to ask them. And first one is for Paula, because I'm very curious of one thing. It's like when you mentioned like that you started the Matternet 10 years ago, right? And you're a lawyer as well, right? So, and when you started Matternet, pretty much all what you wanted to do was fundamentally legal. Like I want to use a strong term, but it's that phase of innovation when your vision is almost in conflict with the regulation. And you are right when you said we had to build it up, right? But how do you come to this idea, that something like that was even possible somehow before everybody else? That's, to me, is always fascinating.
It's a great question. I was just thinking about this, like, how did I put all these pieces together? 10 years back 10 years ago, I didn't put all these pieces together. These pieces were, let's say I put myself in a position and in a place here in Silicon Valley where ideas that were very future forward and moonshots could be nurtured, invested by, and not thrown down from the get-go. And I remember my co-founder, we met at Singularity University, that is a think tank inside NASA Ames Research Park in Mountain View here in California. He saw it. He is an aeronautics engineer, and he saw it. He saw the vision. And I came from the legal world. I was 25 years old. I was fresh out of school. I had done legal studies and then won a Fulbright scholarship and came here to the United States, not to learn technology. I came to learn the future of governments. And it was that conflicting thing when I hit a wall and I saw that the systems the system in which I was operating was very slow and was not going to create change at the pace that I wanted to create change. And I did a step back and found technology. And then drones found me. But I was putting myself in a place where I wanted to do something critical. It was never about drones, actually. It was about solving a critical problem of providing infrastructure where if we didn't provide that infrastructure, initially 1 billion people was completely disconnected from local and economic activity, from healthcare services and whatnot. And then I realized that, oh, if I can bring to market 1 billion people, maybe I can subsidize how I bring to market these 1 billion people with this drone delivery system. If I make it work for places that are already, for people that are already in market, like these 4 billion people that are already in market, but where we're stuck in this infrastructure that we built, legacy infrastructure that we built 20 years ago and 30 and 50 years ago. But the connecting dots there was that for me, one day, because I didn't believe, I didn't see this, my co-founder tells me, well, Paula, the problem is that the main challenge to have anything new, and drone delivery is one of these, and infrastructure one of these, is poor government decision making. Actually, poor government decision making is the reason why we are going to build this drone infrastructure, because they didn't, you know, I was born in a poor country, and I still today, I'm 35, I go to places that when I was born, they didn't have a road, and still today, they don't have a road. So, and I was like, this has been constant poor decision making year after year, different political parties, different people, different everybody, different community leaders haven't solved this problem. Can we solve it with the different means? That is the tech, and then it's called a drone. And that was the premise back then. And I was like, I can build that. And I can see that because I'm a regulatory expert. I've built courts from scratch. I've built legal process from scratch. And I'm gonna find where's the legal vacuum, where's the gray area, so I can go and build the system, not because I wanna be a pioneer, but because I see the problem. And that, sticking to the problem, seeing that problem so closely to me, to home. I didn't know anything about drone, but I understood my problem. And I understood the main challenge to solve that problem for the rest of us. And I was never thinking about legal, actually. Legal was, again, a means to the end, and actually it became a means to the end. It became a piece. And this allowed me also to disconnect from, I'm a lawyer, or I'm a technologist, or I'm a this, or I'm a that. No, I'm a solver of things. And I know how to put the pieces together. So these things, these new things, these new systems happen.
Thank you. I understand. It's very, very fascinating. The whole thinking process is great. And I have a similar question actually for Barbara, in the sense that, you know, traditional, I can imagine, I mean, you come more from a, you know, traditional, you know, telco world, right? And we know telcos as, you know, these giants that are difficult to move, more like tanker ships sometimes, right? But you are in there kind of embracing this innovation and you know, in GSMA, kind of almost like advising and shepherding all the telcos of the world into this new world for them, which is drones and, you know, if you want to push it, even aviation, right? So how do you come about that? Because this is also somehow interesting. How did this come to be in GSMA and in the telcos in general? And how do you see that?
So yeah, so that's quite interesting. Let's say my area when I started to jump in is about 5 years ago, or a little bit more than 5 years ago. And the reason was, funny enough, some of the operators had to solve some of the problems that were not possible to solve otherwise, a little bit like Paula mentioned. And it's something to do with disasters. And you can see that in the United States, you know, with the Katrina or with all these type of incidents, or also in Japan, there's a lot of floods area, and lots of issues when you tear down completely the network, but you still need to provide at least the minimum service, the emergencies. The easiest way is like, well, either I have a truck that I drive there, but if the area is not accessible, I need something else. What can it be? It has to be something in the sky. So that is where the first drones came to be used, is mainly to provide the emergency services in this area or situation of need. From that, then you start understanding the challenges also and the possibilities. Obviously, drones have a limited, at least at that time, we're talking indeed 6 or 7 years ago, or even more. So it was everything done a little bit like an emergency ad hoc. The drones couldn't fly for a long time. Then you start finding other solutions. And then we had a conversation with some of the pioneers in this area and says, well, actually, I think we have a case or we have opportunity. And there are a lot of things that we can do because drones, the first thing that you think about it is you have to be even there to fly it. But if I have an emergency situations where there's a flood, how do I have always a pilot very close and in control also? So then you start extrapolating and thinking, okay, I should be able to pilot it wherever I am. Control, having maybe a fleet of these drones, and then it means connectivity. Connectivity, and we say we know about connectivity. How better than us can actually explain about the connectivity and also advise this new market how we can work together to provide the connectivity, particularly for the low altitude. So there's a lot of discussion, you can say, you know, from low to high altitude stratospheric. But there is where we started having this conversation. And I had to do it, I'm still doing the job on 2 ways, trying to interject and have been a conversation with the drone stakeholders and the players, see what the connectivity can bring and what we can work together to make it happen, make sure that the solution on drones are scalable and affordable, otherwise we are not successful. And on the other side, also try to explain to the telco ecosystem that there is opportunity to be explored, because it's all about, at the end, everybody has to have a benefit. And that is the difficulty is to explain where the benefits are and when these benefits are. So that is also a very long journey. So we are used to be a little bit, not so much quick, but at least I think so, because we are in a phase where they establish, so we have a bit quicker turns of new technologies. Even for yourself, your smartphones are much quicker coming out as a technology, the network improves every, you know, we have a turn of 10 years, but every few years you have an upgrades and changes. In the aviations, as you know better than I do, it's a bit slower. So we are here for the long journey, and that is also difficult conversations to interject in a fast market, that there is opportunity, but you have to stick in the journey for quite some time. And on the other hand, is also the startups, or the company like you, they also need to be quicker, because you cannot wait 10 years to have something to happen. So we're trying to fit in between and see how we can work together to move it faster, safely. I say always safely, but is how I jump in. And when the things start turning, I think it's 2018, and I had to go to conferences where it was possible and start meeting the people in the aviation, in the drones, and what they were doing, listen to them, see how the market reacts, and meeting people that are visionary, that we can work together. And that's happened on the Goodman conference, I think, where you were there, you, Lorenzo, was there at the time. And that's where I see that there was most of the interest to move faster. So that's where we started to see a synergy, and then working, having this cooperation with Goodman, which is the Global UTM Association. So from that I think that was, let's say, the turning key. And I can tell you that also from the mobile ecosystem, you see that there's been an increase. So there's a much more interest. Company, it could be like Nokia, Ericsson, and Huawei, they're all creating a dedicated group where they look at this area. And also the MNO, they have a teams, they're more dedicated. So it's starting to get more traction. But that's where I sit. And I'm a firm believer that it can happen. So there is a benefit to bring. Yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't put so much effort myself. I tell you that.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara. And I think it's interesting because, you know, Paula, you were mentioning the need for infrastructure, the need that you saw at the time, and I need to create this. I need to almost cover the gap, you know, that poor government decision making has created. And Barbara, you say, like, I see this need of connectivity somehow that, you know, in certain situations I need to be able to cover. And for you, Bronwyn, the question is, I think you're very much a data, person, right? So you see drones as tools to create data. And so it seems to me that the gap that you are seeing is the gap of data. And the question would be like, how is data a game changer for customers that you are currently interacting with? What kind of benefits can this drone data delivered by drone somehow provide to those customers, and what's the biggest challenge? And before you answer, just again a reminder, we are also live on LinkedIn, so we wanted to say hello and thank you to the followers on LinkedIn as well, and also a reminder for everybody to ask questions so that the conversation can become even more interactive. But Bronwyn.
Absolutely. I echo everything that Barbara and Paula shared. It's infrastructure, it's timing for this industry, and regulations really are driving how fast we can go. But seems to be great synergy between the FAA and other agencies, along with the private sector, to advance us forward. And at the end of the day, for those of us in the drone industry and data collection, it is about the data. I mean, I always say this, my customers don't care if I put a sensor on a kite. Can you get the data for me? Everything that we say, all these fancy drones and artificial intelligence, all of that is great. But at the end of the day, what they want is data. And of course, we are gathering photogrammetric and geospatial data. And it's either for inspection and mapping, and it's about asset management, disaster observation and an inspection. And so, depending on the sector really determines and drives the end user's need. But for them and for the customer, it's about speed, it's about information so that they can make really quick and fast business decisions on how to deploy their resources to either maintain their assets, to address a quick emergency, long-term planning. So there's a variety of different, need states on the back end. And I see drones as a great opportunity to do that, because for so long, the industry has used very, expensive resources to try to solve this problem, and a lot of human risk to go and collect it. I don't know about you, but if you've ever climbed a telecom tower, that's a pretty scary job. I watched some of those videos on YouTube, and I'm like, I don't know how they do it. But being able to know what's going on with your assets down to a very minute level will help you understand in the long run the cost of and when you need to replace, how you need to address. And for us, we chose infrastructure as the focus, critical infrastructure as targets, because for me, it's about making sure that we stay up and running. It's close to 95 to 99% of the time. Now that there's weather disasters and others, fires, regular wind damage, but if we can provide that data quickly, customers can make sure that their end users and their customers are satisfied and that they stay connected. Because without it, we're in a very dire situation. If telecom towers go down, utilities go down, there's a dam that's about to burst due to some kind of catastrophe or disaster. And then, of course, for us, climate and environmental observation. But, these use cases expand across construction. Ensuring that the process is effectively being managed to spec, ensuring that assets are, well understood and where they're placed and how to deploy them again. So, we see this as a game changer.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to spend maybe like 5-10 minutes about connectivity, because we keep hearing about connectivity, telecommunication towers, and all of that. And I want to ask the question first to Bronwyn, because everybody expects I ask it to Barbara, but I want to ask it to Bronwyn. about 5G. Like it's of course Barbara will tell us it's gonna be amazing, obviously, right? But from your perspective, like what is the impact that 5G is gonna have on the operations that you are conducting, and how do you use connectivity today, and how do you think you're gonna use it tomorrow? And then we see whether Barbara is working on that or not, right? Just curious to know from you first.
Yes, well, this topic, I have this conversation about 5G at least once or twice a week, and it really is going to be a game changer, specifically for us from a B2B perspective, because it's really going to enable automation, faster transfer of data, and this is critical. So for all the autonomous systems that we're working on building, it will allow us to, especially in remote locations and not so much in urban areas. Urban areas are fairly connected, but that real-time connection between our equipment, our UAVs and our other equipment, real time back to our server so that we can get it analyzed and quickly back over to the customer. And as we think about autonomous flight, we need to make sure that there's great communication between the controls and command center and then of course the UAVs. And 5G is going to be a game changer, and then you mix a little bit of edge computing in there and you've got magic happening. And so when we think about, for us, these little flying robots, as well as other bipedal robots and others, 5G, because of the amount of data that we need to power all these very sophisticated pieces of equipment, 5G will be a huge change in that practice and process. And so to get the speed that we want, this real-time data, the accuracy, the autonomy, 5G, and that infrastructure investment is what's going to power that. Because without that, things are just going to run slower. You're going to have limited, like now, things run slower, and you can run the risk of things not operating well or to the maximum of what the vision is, just because you don't have the you don't have the power to transfer information very quickly, and so it's going to slow down the whole practice and the whole process. So we're looking forward to it, and we're in these conversations constantly about 5G, and our equipment. In our protocol, has a 5G base. So we're looking forward to that happening, and I know I'm not the only one in the industry that's looking forward to that.
I can see Barbara smiling, so I think we are good there. I think, right, Barbara? All right, I think we touched a little bit on a bit of technology. I want to go back a bit on entrepreneurship, because ultimately we have here example of great entrepreneurs, and I wanted to ask you, Paola in particular. I know you have founded Glass, and I was making some research, before this webinar on what's about, and I found something interesting about this the funding mechanism, the Futura Fund, micro investments in women-led moonshots, right? And I think that this is very pertinent to this webinar somehow, and I wanted to ask you, like, what's about that? Like, how the idea came about, and what can you tell us about this initiative of Glass?
Yes, awesome. So it's all connected. Like, at the end of the day, it takes, someone's asking there in the questions about best and worst scenarios, and I'm not gonna. We can talk later about the worst case scenarios, because in my vision, drone delivery and drones flooding the skies responsibly, operating and doing things that drones could do in a better fashion than humans, inspecting infrastructure, removing congestion from our roads, because about 80% of the packages that we move, if we don't integrate them, they're less than 5 pounds and we can perfectly move them. All of this vision, in my view, the best case scenario is already late. Like, we are so late for what I was hoping to have 10 years later. And it's because that's the founders and that's the entrepreneurs. And for me, everybody's an entrepreneur, but this is not the topic today, but it's like everybody that takes something and makes something out of nothing and puts pieces together, whether that's a project, whether that's an idea, whether that's a company, is someone that is that is using their ingenuity and that is an entrepreneur or an intra-entrepreneur, however you want to call it. So what I'm doing now with Glass is not different than what I was doing with Matternet, with the only difference that now I do feel I am in my waters and in my element. And this is very important, especially for groups that have been traditionally not been exposed or given the stages that they deserve, because I know we've been already doing the work. So I always get surprised when people tell me, oh, there are not so many women in GovTech. That's my industry, the industry I am now with Glass. Oh, there are not so many women in drones or drone delivery. I'm like, what do you mean? We founded drone delivery. Well, what do you mean there are not enough women? It's just that we are too busy backstage doing operational work or doing the type of work that, you know, you just, before you talk about things, you need to get things done. So I think that what we're doing at Glass now, that is basically, we're creating a software ecosystem for governments to be able to operate. And we're leveraging artificial intelligence so we can really first digitize and then scale. And after we scale that, we can streamline government decision-making on anything. Passing a drone law, running an election process, doing procurement and whatnot. Our first product is a procurement platform that allows governments to make great compliant and paperless procurement decisions, like, okay, we have an emergency or we have a pandemic, or all of our systems that we spend years setting up, let's say legacy human infrastructure and process infrastructure doesn't work anymore. How do we solve a problem? So I just feel the connecting dots here are, whether it's in our case, physical infrastructure to connect the world, or digital infrastructure for governments to operate, there is a better way. And we can leapfrog roads and poor government decision-making by creating infrastructure that doesn't exist today. And the question is, how do you bring people from where they are to what it can be without having all the pieces together? Because you at the same time need to communicate this. So you need to put the pieces together, you need to communicate this, you need to raise money for this, you need to build a company, a hardware company for this. In the case of drone delivery, now I'm building software, but you know, I rely in connectivity, I rely in great servers. I'm looking forward to edge computing so I can rely less on cloud when, you know, things don't work, and you know, WhatsApp and Instagram are out for the whole day, and I have governments reaching out to us about things that we were doing on those channels. So it's all interconnected, as Browen was talking. And you know, you need to have great connectivity, you need to upgrade the system, you need to upgrade many systems, and these upgrades cannot wait 10 years. So with Glass, we're looking forward helping governments making better decisions on how do I enact a drone regulation like we did with you when you were at the Swiss FOCA. When we didn't have all the pieces together, we could take some risks, but we couldn't take all the risks. How do we have these conversations augmented by artificial intelligence and technology to understand better the scenarios, to understand better the pieces that we don't know, and that we need to go and find answers? Like, you know, we were super creative back then, like, okay, if the drone loses connectivity, if the drone has an emergency, if the drone power shuts off, what do we do? And we created all these scenarios where suddenly we have a brilliant idea that is, let's put a little parachute on these drones. And something that, you know, is like, oh, now we have a new mini segment that is parachutes for drones. But, you know, we came up with these ideas and we put them together, and now they become a standard. And now the United States knows how to draft regulation. It was derived from data coming from other places that where we were actually operating the thing and willing to take a risk. And so this is where all the dots connect. You cannot create this resiliency and create this peace of knowing that you're going to put the pieces together, but they won't come together until they come together. And I think I learned all of that at Matternet, and now operating, using them at Glass, and having many government agencies that I work with. You know, we start working on the procurement segment, and then suddenly I'm talking to 40 fleet managers, and they have never operated a drone, and they're like, can you get me one of these drones here, because I need to do this and this and that. And I'm like, I can definitely see that. You start talking to the sustainable and the green transportation managers all around the United States, that they want to upgrade their infrastructure, and you're like, it's a perfect connection of, yes, I can help you see how to connect the infrastructure. I can advise you on how to enact that regulatory scheme, and I can also connect you to the companies that have the pieces that you need in order to make all of that happen. And by the way, I know under which purchasing vehicle we're going to do that. That is not a traditional contract. It needs to be an innovation type of contract. And if you spend 1 year to put it together, you're going to be 1 year too late. So all these things come together very naturally, because we are, you know, at the forefront of something, and we can start seeing the pieces that we can connect looking back, and then also doing the homework looking forward, knowing that we cannot expect 10 years for the next crisis to solve, for the next infrastructure, for the next upgrade.
I like this refrain of the 10 years, because also in the question that you mentioned, Paula, you know, there is a question about the best and the worst case scenario for the next 10 years, right? And what I found interesting in the question, and I was thinking about it while you were answering, is that you also mentioned, oh, 10 years ago, I thought we would be much faster, right? And now 10 years later, we have achieved a lot, but probably not as much as I hoped, right? And you are, I kind of infer that you're thinking, hey, governments could do better here. Like, I'm going to go and create a startup to be somehow an accelerator of government decision making, right? And maybe in the next 10 years, we're going to be faster. Maybe the question to Bronwyn about this, how do you see this? Like the next 10 years, what is your best case and worst case scenario? You can even do 5 years, if 10 years from now it's too far out, but just to get a sense, right? And on your experience from the field almost.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny that you asked me that, because I ask this question on my podcast to people all the time. You know, what do you think is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? And things move a lot slower than often is advertised. I think that, you know, a lot of people in all, you know, new advanced technology industries want to be first and, you know, put a lot of hype out there. But, you know, to Paula's, you know, comments and her vision, and it takes a while. But the most important thing is safety. And before we, you know, put the cart before the horse, if I can use an old adage, we've got to make sure that all this new equipment is safe, whether it's, you know, delivery drones, like, you know, what Matternet has demonstrated is possible, to what we're doing with autonomous drone systems, autonomous cars, robotics, passenger, you know, urban air mobility and advanced air mobility vehicles. We've got to make sure that they're safe. And how do they operate in the national airspace? But I think in 5 years, by the time we get to, you know, 2027, 2028, we're going to start seeing delivery drones floating by. They may not be everywhere, but they will be out. You will be able to start getting packages from inspection and mapping. I think we will have some autonomous systems in operation, but it'll be, I think, limited. In 10 years, I think it'll be, you know, fairly ubiquitous. And I think also the same thing with delivery, as well as passenger and cargo drones. I think as we start getting to that 10-year mark, we'll go from limited markets to, you know, a more expansive across cities and rural areas. The biggest question, or what are the most important use cases to start with? I think medical, as Matternet has demonstrated, is a primary example of what needs to come first. You know, I think my shoes from Amazon can probably wait a while. Sorry, Amazon, but you know, that's not as urgent. And so I think we're going to see in 10 years a whole different world. I think that we'll start seeing more of the Jetsons, but the infrastructure has to be built, you know, the landing pads for both drones as well as, you know, delivery. You know, how do you make that last mile work? How do you reach the customer? In what instance will you deliver directly to the home? And then in what instance will you have other technology bringing it directly to the door? And then for advanced aerial mobility, how do you, and you know, where do you land these? Where do you create these vertiports? Who owns them? If you're going to land on rooftops, how do you retrofit existing buildings? You know, our new high rises is part of that rooftop. Now the HVAC is moved to a different portion so that you have now a landing pad. How do you manage the, you know, in all this unique climate change and weather? You know, how do you manage this flight in these kinds of environments, especially in harder to reach locations? And more importantly, what is the business model of all this? But you know, I think those are the things that we have to overcome. And you know, we mentioned connectivity and edge, but in 10 years, I think that's what we're solving. And I think it'll be a completely different world in 10 years where you'll be able to get your passenger drone ride. Inspection and mapping will be automated for the most part. And yeah, I think the skies will look very different in 10 years.
Fantastic. It almost feels to me that we need like a first 10 years is to get to a position where you can scale, and the second 10 years is to scale, right? It's like a 20 years, you know, cycle. And I guess we should work all together to compress this for the next cycle, maybe and do 5 + 5 rather than 10 + 10. But yeah, not easy for sure. All right, let's talk a little bit about diversity, you know, and I want to just move the conversation a little bit in that direction. I loved what you said, Paola, before when you mentioned the fact that, you know, people say there are no women, and you say no, there are. It's just we are all on the background, you know, making this industry growing together. And I think this will be almost like a perfect tagline for this kind of webinar we do, is just like to shine that spotlight on those women who are doing that work, you know, on the background. But I wanted to ask maybe Barbara, you are engaged in a million of activities at all levels, you know, from big corporation to small startups. And I'm sure you see a lot of diversity activities, you know, from very useful to completely useless. And what do you think are the best examples, right? How can we tackle this topic, you know, in a way of, you know, so that to be impactful without being rhetoric, if you want, or how do you see this?
So thanks for the question. Yeah, so this is always a very difficult topic. So diversity in general it's like in the technologies that we talk about. You have a system of systems. The complexity is growing. So it's such a broad topic with a lot of variables in it that is impossible to solve it as a whole in one. You know, we are where we are. It took centuries to get where we are. So talking about times, it's not a quick process. And it doesn't matter how much we learned before, because in human nature, we still want to do it, right? Don't learn from the previous mistake. We still try to put our heads in it and try to think slightly different. We know what it didn't work, so why don't we start from there? But so there is a lot of, as you mentioned, rhetoric. There's a lot of PR maybe around, which helps. So the PR is helping to bring, you know, the actual message to show that there is, you know, an interest with directions. But then you also have to go to the actions, the actual actions that we do for getting to break this problem. And that is where it's difficult to see which one does it right or which one worked. I think it's also because maybe it's not enough time to measure. So I'm a data person, as probably would say. I'm a techie. I need data. I need to prove. Tell me, if you tell me that it works, I need to have proof, right? And to me, the things that we see that are working is try to tackle it from the bottom up as much as you can. So you need the top down. That has to continue to work. But the movement is actually more effective, from my view, from the bottom up, from the small area that you have an influence. So for example, if I work in a team My team, I have to do it myself. So I have to make sure that I have diversity. And I loved always to work with students from any nationality, any background. Why? Because they inject ideas. And we need to have them to also be listened to. So I always notice that when we have a new employee, it's much easier to swamp this employee in our way of working than the other way around. So at a certain time, the new employee gets to be used to what you do because it's easier, or it gets out of the company because it doesn't like it, or she doesn't like it. Instead of us putting an effort, and I know it's very difficult because we are busy, we have deadlines, but we have to give the space to the new employee to express themselves, tell us what are the idea, listen to this idea, and maybe pick one of these ideas, let them run for a bit and see if it is effectively working in a small team. And then from there you can grow. So I saw that when you have this environment, it works. It does work. And it's a very small thing to do, all of us, but I always try to say, do not overwhelm the newcomers with your procedures, with the way of working, the documentations, everything you need to do. They come from, inspirational. They come from university, they try things, and then you actually drown them. And that is easy to get that mood going in a big organization. So it's also slightly different from a smaller and startup where they have more things to do by themselves, so they're free than a big organization. But I would say just help them to have a space to be listened to. That's already something that we can do. The other one is it's very easy to say, I want to recruit more diverse people in my company. But then you advertise the position in the same way that you always did, with the same, I want the best in class that has 10 years of experience, that has done that one, that he knows that one. And you advertise on the same portals, on the same place. If you want diversity, you have to go to the other place. Change the way that you describe the things. I cannot have, even sometimes I said, well, I wish I could have this genius. When we describe the job description, say it's a genius, but none of this person is working in my company. How did we come up with this job description? So we have to be a little bit more realistic and trying to express a balance. Yeah, nobody can know everything, but it's a balance between what they know, how they work together, if this is important, and how you can grow, and also advertise in a different way what you're looking for more than what you know, or go to a different dedicated portals where there are more women or maybe more cultural diversity. These are the things that to me worked well. And I'll stop right there because I could go forever.
Thank you. No, that's very interesting, Barbara. Thank you very much. And I want to pick up a question from Antonio Gonzalez. We mentioned government and regulators, and I know Antonio is with one of them. Our European Aviation Safety Agency, and I think he is asking a very good question. I will probably ask Paola because you mentioned this before, right? So he's basically saying, look, we understand that, the industry want to move fast and the governments and regulators are kind of like keeping up, right? Trying to keep up, but sometimes they end up being some sort of an obstacle to the progress and the speed. And the question is, from Antonio is, what is the ideal situation would look like? Like when authorities that want to keep up with the industry, what should they be doing actually in really in the best of their intentions? And I want to, as an authority myself, I want to say something. Obviously, I used to sign the approvals like for Matternet, right? And every time you sign that approval, you're thinking, I really hope that we did a good job, right? So I understand why you could be slow because you're putting your pencil and you're signing something and And you want to be sure that that's something that you are signing is actually safe. But at the same time, there must be ways that we can, we can do things better, right? And I think it's very admirable from an authority to come in and say, hey, what can we do better? How can we pick up with you guys? And I'm sure, Paula, you have a lot to say here.
I mean, I think this is a great question. So thank you for that. I think we did it in Switzerland. And we did a first of its kind in Switzerland. And that is a moment in time that we didn't know we were doing that, but we were creating a regulatory sandbox that now is a very common, that now is a thing in government systems when they want to experiment with something. So you basically need to merge two cultures that are opposites. And that happens also with drones. So you need to harmonize the need for predictability, the need for safety, the need for anticipating what's going to happen, the need for having checks and balances in place. And at the same time, you need to know, before you write a regulation, you need to know, what can I allow in this regulation? Can I allow a drone of which size to fly at which height, to use what type of systems mandatorily, so I know it has the minimum requirements to keep an operation safe and everyone around them safe and property and people safe. Like, you need to know many of these things, and then there are things you don't know. When you look at it from a government perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from an established player perspective, it's an impossible task. It cannot be done with that level of pressure, with that level of expectation. It can never be met, because you need to put in writing things that will spend a couple of months of years before they get approved. And by the time they're approved, what we wrote in that piece of legislation is already obsolete, because some other group have experimented so much with it that we know that the first version of our idea is never the best version of our idea. So how do the first version of a solution to a problem is never the best version of the solution to the problem. So there you have a contradictory culture with entrepreneurship and innovation. And you need to understand that culture and not try to, one be the other, but to try to take what serves you from that one. And in entrepreneurship, and here in Silicon Valley, the motto is fail fast, fail often, because the first version of your idea is never the best version of your idea. And pioneering people, the people that did the first of, if they don't become part of the best of, they get to go to a museum, and nobody wants to be in a museum only. So we understand that from the entrepreneurial point of view, we understand that very fastly. We also understand that to be able to crack something, it needs to become your bread and butter. It needs to become your sole focus. It needs to become your one thing. And we don't go from 0 to 100. We go from 0 to 1, and from 1 to 10, and from 10 to 100. So because we understand in innovation how to build things fast and how to not spend resources before we know where to put those resources, we are like, okay, what are these guys that are so rigid telling me? And then you're like, they tell you that when things go wrong, and you, entrepreneur, know they will go wrong. They will go wrong 9 times before they go right the first time. They're telling you that all these 9 times, you need to continue doing them because you know how to do them, but you need to do it in a control space. You need to have plan A, plan B, plan C. You need to have the parachute. Oh, you had never thought about a parachute. Oh, because you thought it was not gonna. No, you need to have a parachute. And suddenly, if the parachute doesn't work, you need to have plan Z, and maybe plan D is that when everything else fails, you need to have an insurance that covers better. It covered the people and property than you. Forget about your drone. Now it's about people. and property. So when you start thinking that they're not asking for the things they're asking because they want to be mean or because they don't want to be innovative, they want to help you, but you need to help them. And when we start and the problem is, Lorenzo, that we cannot get to even that conversation if there are no channels to have the conversation. So the moment you're a small startup with a great idea, and remember, every big company was once a small company. Apple is the most valuable company in the world, and they started in a garage. And everybody is an Apple in the making. If they go and spend the time and spend the years and whatnot. So if you don't allow a small anyone to have an open door to meet the authority, you're gonna miss out in every innovation opportunity. And the innovators, if you don't know the channels, if you don't knock on the doors, if you're not willing to say, hey, CAA, I might look a little bit dumb, like Barbara was saying, all these geniuses that we're hiring everywhere, I don't know where they are because it's definitely not me, but this non-genius is gonna try to propose something and maybe we come to an agreement. So that, owning that, saying, maybe I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I'm gonna say something here that might make sense. And then having the aviation people say, oh, we are very smart and actually we don't know how to solve that neither. We're like, okay, now can we talk? Having those conversations is what can create a safe space between people where we can innovate together little by little, because we know that we're doing our best, that we're putting checks and balances, and that our partners, the counterpart, they got us. They know we're doing our best. We're not gonna fly in a place where we all fail, but we're gonna fly in this little space. And if something fails, they will say that we failed in a controlled manner because we tested this and we tried our best. So I think that this is how you create these little environments where little by little, we check hypotheses, we check if the parameters that we gave for something to happen for the first time in many different industries and scenarios, parts of the airspace can be checked and can be met. And we always have a big box of uncertainty that needs to be fulfilled by the trust that me as an aviation authority or as a regulatory authority is giving to someone so they can go and execute their vision. It's all about trust. And you don't want to break that trust. And that trust elevates everybody. So that's, but you need to go little by little, because again, as a startups, we know we cannot overpromise. Actually, the motto is underpromise and overdeliver. And as a regulatory bodies, is all about calculated risks, knowing that you are trusting a lot, and you also need to follow a lot what and how these innovators are going to solve these problems. And you need to ask your questions, because if you don't ask your questions, you're not opening up the whole space for someone like us to come up with solutions that nobody has thought about. So we have an amazing blueprint for innovation at large in complex and highly regulated environments, with the experiment that the Swiss FOCA did to enable drone operations and open a highly regulated and complex airspace in the heart of Europe. We have that blueprint. We need to extract that blueprint, and we need to make it actionable so other aviation authorities can piggyback over that, because I had dozens of CAAs wanting to understand if Swiss FOCA could come and train them. And I'm like, train you on what? They were just following their regulatory scheme, where actually it allowed them to create some temporary things. So you can learn from them, but you need to do your own path, but it's just going little by little.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you very much, Paola, for this answer. And I'm sure Antonio will have a lot to think about, on how to do that, but very, very good. I think we are really running, out of time. It's actually, we are perfectly on time. It's 5 o'clock here in Switzerland. I would like to thank you all very much for this super interesting, at least in my mind, panel. I would like to thank, of course, those who have been joining us on Zoom, those who have been joining on LinkedIn, and of course, all of those who will be looking at the webinar on demand. So thank you again, everyone, and see everybody on DroneTalks.online, of course, and to the next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.